The city appears first as a silhouette, then as a presence. Before the streets reveal themselves, before voices carry across the air, there is water. The Bosphorus stretches wide and patient, reflecting a skyline shaped by centuries of ambition. Domes rise beside slender minarets, palace walls catch the early light, and the horizon feels less like a boundary and more like an introduction. Istanbul does not rush to explain itself. It allows you to approach, to observe, to slowly understand that this is not a city built in a single age, but layered across many. From a distance it feels unified. Up close it becomes a mosaic. Stone against wood, old beside new. Prayer calls drifting over the hum of commerce. The sea does not divide the city, it organizes it. Ferries move steadily between continents, carrying merchants, officials, workers, and travelers who cross from Europe to Asia as if stepping between rooms. The water is not an obstacle here. It is a corridor, a rhythm, a constant reminder that Istanbul has always been a meeting place rather than an endpoint. History in this city does not vanish. It accumulates. Beneath every visible structure lies another story, another foundation, another empire that once believed it would last forever. Roman columns support Byzantine arches. Byzantine walls stand beside Ottoman courtyards. The passage of power has not erased what came before. It has simply added new layers above the old. By the 19th century, Istanbul has already been imperial for over 1,000 years. It has worn different names, answered to different rulers, and spoken in many administrative languages, yet its identity remains continuous. The city endures even as its titles change. At its core lies the memory of Constantinople, the eastern capital of Rome, once the center of a vast Christian empire. Later, it becomes the beating heart of Ottoman rule, a Muslim imperial capital stretching across 3 continents. These transitions are not gentle, yet the city absorbs them. Structures are repurposed, spaces redefined, rituals adjusted. What was once a church becomes a mosque. What was once a forum becomes a square. The transformation is visible, but so is the continuity. Istanbul is not a city that forgets. It is a city that reorganizes. By the early 1800s, the Ottoman Empire still commands immense territory, but the world around it is accelerating. Across Europe, industry begins to reshape economies, armies modernize, and new financial systems tighten the pace of political change. Istanbul still governs with ceremony and tradition, still presents itself with imperial confidence, yet a subtle tension emerges. The question is no longer only who holds power, but whether established systems can keep pace with a century demanding speed and efficiency. The city stands proud, but the ground beneath global politics is shifting. Power in Istanbul has always been both visible and deliberate. Palaces do not merely decorate the skyline, they function as centers of decision, making where petitions are reviewed, alliances considered, and policies shaped through layers of consultation. Authority here has historically moved with patience, guided by precedent as much as urgency. This measured pace once provided stability. In a faster world, it begins to feel like friction. The empire still commands loyalty, but loyalty itself is becoming more conditional, influenced by economics, technology, and distant developments that cannot be ignored. Yet, beyond the halls of governance, the city operates on another scale entirely. Ships arrive at the Golden Horn loaded with grain, textiles, and metals. Porters move goods through winding streets that seem designed more by habit than by plan. Workshops echo with the steady rhythm of tools meeting wood and iron. Cafes fill with conversation in multiple languages, where traders discuss prices while poets exchange verses. This is not a silent monument to past glory. It is an active organism sustained by movement and exchange. The empire may define borders, but the city defines daily life. Walk further inward, and the grandeur softens into intimacy. Narrow lanes bend between wooden houses, leaning slightly toward one another, as if shaped by time itself. Laundry hangs above doorways, casting small shadows that sway with the breeze. Children move freely between thresholds, their games unconcerned with the politics that occupy distant chambers. Neighbors recognize each other by routine more than by name. Here, history feels less like a timeline and more like a backdrop, present, influential, yet rarely intrusive. The rhythm of ordinary life continues regardless of imperial debates. Religion marks the passage of hours without demanding attention. The call to prayer travels across rooftops, answered by distant echoes that ripple through districts built around local mosques. Bells ring from churches in other quarters, while synagogues open their doors to familiar congregations. Diversity here is not abstract philosophy. It is practical coexistence shaped by precedent and daily interaction. Differences are visible, yet routine creates a shared understanding. The city functions not because everyone is the same, but because everyone knows the rhythm. Markets begin to stir before the sun fully claims the sky. Merchants arrange goods with practiced efficiency, spices releasing faint aromas that drift into passing crowds. Transactions unfold through gestures as much as words, trust built over repeated exchanges rather than formal contracts. Commerce provides predictability, and predictability offers stability, long before political weakness becomes visible in official records. Cities reveal their strength through these quiet continuities. Empires announce themselves with proclamations, cities endure through repetition. Seen from above, Istanbul in the 19th century appears confident, its domes steady, its waters busy, its districts alive with motion. Seen from within, it reveals something more complex, a balance between permanence and change, tradition and adaptation. The empire governs from elevated chambers, but the city breathes through streets, markets, and shorelines. One represents authority, the other represents life itself. And as the century unfolds, it becomes increasingly clear that while authority can falter, the life of a city is far more resilient. In this moment, Istanbul is not merely a capital. It is a convergence of eras, a structure built upon structures, a living archive that continues to expand even as the world around it accelerates. The question is not whether it will change. It always has, but how it will carry its past forward into a future arriving faster than any empire can fully control. The skyline remains steady. The waters continue to move, and beneath the surface of ceremony, the city prepares, quietly and constantly, to adapt. Part 2. Society, culture, economy, and daily life. Step away from the palaces and ministries, and the scale of the city changes. Streets narrow, sound softens. The grandeur that dominates the skyline gives way to the texture of ordinary life. Wooden houses stand close together, their upper floors leaning slightly over the lanes, as if shaped by generations rather than architects. Windows remain open to passing air. Laundry stretches from balcony to balcony, creating shifting patterns of light and shadow. Children move between doorways without hesitation, crossing invisible boundaries that adults no longer notice. Here, the empire feels distant. The city feels immediate. Days unfold through repetition more than announcement. Morning begins not with headlines or proclamations, but with familiar sounds, footsteps on stone, shutters opening, distant calls echoing from minarets. Time is measured less by clocks and more by rhythm. Shopkeepers sweep their thresholds, bakers prepare ovens, fishermen return from the water with nets heavy or light, depending on fortune. These gestures repeat day after day, forming a quiet stability that exists beneath political uncertainty. Empires negotiate treaties, neighborhoods negotiate mournings. Religion shapes this rhythm without always demanding attention. Mosques anchor districts, their courtyards offering both spiritual and social gathering spaces. The call to prayer divides the day into recognizable segments, a shared pause that moves across the city like a gentle wave. Alongside formal worship, spiritual life takes quieter forms. Sufi lodges welcome small circles of followers who gather not for spectacle, but for discipline and inward reflection. The turning of dervishes is less performance than devotion, a reminder that faith here is lived as much as it is declared. It is woven into routine rather than set apart from it. Yet Istanbul's religious landscape is not singular. Church bells answer the call to prayer in other quarters, and synagogues open their doors to communities whose histories in the city stretch back centuries. Diversity here does not erase hierarchy. Public life remains shaped primarily by Islamic authority, but coexistence persists through habit and precedent rather than abstract ideals. Communities govern many of their internal affairs, maintaining languages, customs, and traditions within a broader imperial framework. Difference is visible, acknowledged, and negotiated daily. The city functions through accommodation more than uniformity. Nowhere is this negotiation clearer than in the markets. The Grand Bazaar unfolds like an intricate network of arteries, thousands of shops arranged beneath vaulted ceilings that filter sunlight into shifting beams. Goods from distant regions, silks, spices, ceramics, metals, rest side by side, each item carrying traces of another journey. Merchants speak multiple languages with ease, shifting between Greek, Turkish, Armenian, Arabic, and Italian depending on the customer before them. Transactions rely on predictability. Known weights, familiar prices, established reputations. Commerce here is not chaotic. It is rule-bound, structured, and remarkably efficient. In these corridors, stability is created not by decree, but by repetition. Trade extends beyond the bazaar into the waters that surround the city. Ferries cross steadily between continents, carrying workers and officials who move from one shore to another as part of their daily routine. Small boats weave through larger vessels, transporting goods that keep the metropolis supplied. The Bosphorus is not a dividing line. It is a channel of continuity. Movement across it is constant, almost unnoticed by those who depend on it. What appears from afar as geography becomes, up close, infrastructure, a system that allows the city to function regardless of political debates unfolding inland. As the century advances, new influences begin to reshape certain districts. Across the Galata Bridge, the tempo shifts. Streets widen, architecture adopts European styles, and storefronts display imported fashions. Cafes fill with conversations conducted in French and Italian alongside local tongues. Theaters host performances that mirror trends from Paris and Vienna, while printing presses circulate newspapers that carry foreign ideas into Ottoman discourse. This is not imitation alone. it is insertion. European modernity does not replace local culture, it embeds itself beside it, altering the city's rhythm without entirely redefining it. Finance concentrates in these outward-facing quarters. Banks, insurance offices, and trade intermediaries manage flows of capital that stretch far beyond the city's walls. Contracts replace handshakes, and schedules tighten around shipping arrivals and departures. The presence of foreign financial institutions introduces new forms of influence that do not arrive with armies, but with ledgers. The empire continues to govern its streets, yet its economic autonomy becomes increasingly shared with external powers. The change is subtle, often invisible to those carrying goods through alleys, but its effects ripple outward through policy and diplomacy alike. Despite these transformations, daily life retains its familiar cadence. In residential neighborhoods, evening returns families to shared courtyards where conversations unfold under dim lantern light. Meals are prepared with ingredients purchased from the same vendors as the day before. Stories pass between generations, blending memory with folklore until the boundary between past and present softens. These routines provide continuity that political institutions alone cannot supply. A city survives not only through governance, but through the countless small interactions that renew its identity each day. The contrast between districts becomes part of Istanbul's character. On one side of the bridge, tradition organizes space through custom and memory. On the other, modernity introduces speed, contracts, and outward-facing ambition. Neither fully overtakes the other. Instead, they exist in parallel, shaping a metropolis that adapts by layering rather than replacing. This coexistence produces tension, but it also generates resilience. The city learns to operate in multiple tempos at once, measured in prayers and market calls, yet also in ship schedules and printed headlines. What emerges by mid-century is not a city caught between past and future, but a city negotiating both simultaneously. Its markets remain crowded, its ferries continue their crossings, its neighborhoods sustain rhythms that feel unchanged even as new influences arrive. Political authority may shift, economic pressures may tighten, and foreign ideas may circulate with increasing frequency, but the daily mechanics of life persist. Istanbul's strength lies not in resisting change entirely, nor in surrendering to it completely, but in absorbing it piece by piece, allowing continuity and transformation to unfold side by side. In this balance, the essence of the city becomes clear. It is neither frozen in tradition nor swept away by modernity. It is active, layered, and constantly adjusting. An urban landscape where commerce, culture, and community intertwine to sustain momentum regardless of imperial uncertainty. The empire projects power from above, but the city sustains itself from within. And as influences multiply and tempos diverge, Istanbul demonstrates a quiet truth shared by enduring metropolises everywhere. Vitality is measured less by control than by the ability to keep moving. Part 3: Crisis, Adaptation, and Reflection. Change in a city rarely arrives as a single event. It appears in fragments: an unexpected fire, a new decree, a bridge completed, a law announced to a hesitant crowd. In 19th-century Istanbul, disruption often begins with flame. Wooden houses stand close together, streets remain narrow, and when a spark catches, entire districts can vanish overnight. Smoke rises above the skyline that once seemed permanent, reminding residents that even the most familiar surroundings are temporary. Yet each destruction is followed by rebuilding. Stone gradually replaces timber. Roads widen. Regulations tighten. Catastrophe becomes justification for order, and urban planning begins to move from custom toward administration. Political reform follows a similar pattern, urgent, uneven, and frequently resisted. Imperial authority recognizes the need to modernize, to introduce legal guarantees, representative councils, and standardized systems capable of keeping pace with a faster world. Declarations are read aloud in public squares, promising equality before the law and limits to concentrated power. For a brief moment, optimism gathers like a crowd under uncertain weather. Representatives from distant provinces sit together, debating the direction of a vast empire. It is an experiment in openness, ambitious yet fragile, unfolding while external pressures continue to mount. Then events accelerate beyond intention. Wars strain resources, borders contract. Refugees arrive in waves, and financial obligations tighten around the state like invisible chains. Stability begins to outweigh reform. Constitutions are suspended, assemblies dissolved, and authority re-centralized in the name of survival. These decisions are not always sudden. They are calculations made under pressure, where the margin for experimentation narrows with each passing crisis. The empire does not collapse in this moment, but its flexibility diminishes. Control increases where trust once operated, and governance grows more watchful than visionary. Despite these tensions, the city itself continues to function. Ferries still cross the Bosphorus at dawn. Markets open their shutters. Conversations fill cafes and courtyards. From a distance, nothing appears finished or failing. This contrast reveals a quiet paradox. Political systems may weaken while urban life adapts with surprising resilience. Istanbul learns to operate within constraints that would stall less seasoned capitals. It absorbs pressure through routine, through commerce, through the everyday determination of its residents to maintain continuity, regardless of imperial uncertainty. By the closing years of the century, the Ottoman state remains standing, but its governing logic has hardened. Survival begins to take precedence over transformation. The empire still possesses form, its institutions visible, its ceremonies intact, but its capacity to bend without breaking has thinned. Cities, however, measure endurance differently. They rebuild after fires, reorganize after reforms, and continue their rhythms long after political confidence fades. What weakens is not vitality, but autonomy, not movement, but control over direction. So what, then, is Istanbul in the 19th century? It is both a capital under strain and a metropolis in motion. Decline and adaptation unfold together, not as opposites, but as parallel currents shaping the same shoreline. Empires rarely vanish in a single season. They narrow, they stiffen. They lose flexibility before they lose presence. Cities, by contrast, persist through adjustment. They outlast the structures that claim to rule them, carrying fragments of each era forward into the next. And as the century turns, Istanbul does what enduring cities have always done. It continues, layered, imperfect, alive, its waters moving, its streets filling, its skyline steady against the light. History does not end here, it reorganizes. If there is another city or era you would like to see brought back to life, share it below. And if you enjoyed this journey, consider liking the video and subscribing for the next exploration.